Milton Friedman built one of the most influential modern defenses of free market capitalism by combining theory, empirical analysis, and policy design into a coherent framework centered on individual freedom, voluntary exchange, and limited government. At the core of his thinking is the idea that economic freedom is both a means to and a prerequisite for political freedom. When individuals control their own labor, income, and choices, power is decentralized. But when the state controls economic life, it inevitably expands into political and personal control. Friedman defines freedom primarily as the absence of coercion and sees markets as systems of voluntary cooperation where individuals pursue their own goals while unintentionally coordinating with others through prices. For him, the central problem in modern economies is not that markets fail, but that government interventions, often justified as corrections, distort incentives, suppress information, and create new problems that lead to further intervention. This dynamic, in his view, explains inflation, regulatory overreach, stagnation, and bureaucratic inefficiency. Friedman's diagnosis of economic problems consistently returns to incentives and unintended consequences. He argues that policymakers frequently assume benevolent intent is enough, but ignore how individuals respond to rules and constraints. For example, he identifies inflation as always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, driven not by greed or external shocks, but by excessive growth in the money supply, typically caused by central banks trying to stimulate growth or finance government spending. His solution is not discretionary control, but rules-based monetary policy, such as steady, predictable expansion of the money supply. Similarly, he criticizes welfare systems not because he rejects helping the poor, but because complex bureaucratic programs create dependency, inefficiency, and perverse incentives. His proposed alternative, the negative income tax, aims to provide a basic safety net while preserving incentives to work and minimizing administrative control. In education, he argues that public school monopolies reduce quality and innovation, advocating instead for school vouchers to introduce competition and parental choice. Across these issues, his consistent principle is that systems work best when individuals bear the consequences of their choices within a framework of clear, general rules, rather than when outcomes are micromanaged by authorities. Friedman also places heavy emphasis on the limits of government competence. He does not assume policymakers are malicious, but argues they operate under constraints like limited knowledge, political pressure, and institutional incentives that lead to systematic failure. Government agencies lack the feedback mechanisms of markets, no profit and loss signals, weak accountability, and little competition, so mistakes persist and expand. He is especially critical of regulation that protects established interests under the guise of public benefit, such as occupational licensing, tariffs, and industry controls, which often reduce competition and harm consumers. His broader solution is not the elimination of government, but its confinement to a narrow set of roles that revolve around protecting property rights, enforcing contracts, maintaining the rule of law, and providing a stable monetary framework. Beyond that, he argues, intervention tends to replace voluntary cooperation with coercion, substituting political decision-making for individual choice. In terms of what drives economic problems, Friedman consistently points to misaligned incentives and concentrated power. He rejects explanations that blame markets themselves for inequality or instability, instead arguing that distortions often arise from government interference like price controls, monetary mismanagement, or regulatory capture. He is particularly wary of policies aimed at achieving equality of outcomes, arguing that such goals require continuous intervention and voluntary exchanges and ultimately undermine both freedom and efficiency. His famous line captures this trade-off. Societies that prioritize equality over freedom tend to lose both, while those that prioritize freedom often achieve greater prosperity and broader improvements in well-being. For Friedman, the free market is not perfect, but it is self-correcting and adaptive, while government systems tend to lock in errors and expand power in response to failure. Friedman's relationship with the Austrian school, especially figures like Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek, is one of strong overlap in conclusions but deep differences in method and emphasis. He agrees with them that markets are superior to central planning, that dispersed knowledge makes economic coordination complex, and that government intervention often produces unintended consequences. However, he departs sharply in methodology. While Austrians rely on deductive reasoning from first principles, praxeology, Friedman embraces empirical testing and predictive models, arguing that theories should be judged by their ability to explain and predict real-world outcomes. He is also less absolutist. Unlike Mises or later Austrians such as Rothbard, Friedman accepts a limited but active role for government, including monetary policy, a minimal welfare system, and certain public goods. Where Austrians emphasize the logical impossibility of socialism, calculation problem, and the knowledge limits of planners, Friedman often focuses on practical inefficiency and policy failure. In short, Austrians provide a deeper theoretical critique of planning, while Friedman provides a more pragmatic, policy-oriented defense of markets. At a deeper philosophical level, Friedman's support for the free market is rooted in a tradition that traces back to John Locke, Thomas Paine, and Adam Smith, though he expresses it in a modern, less explicitly metaphysical form. Like Locke, he treats the individual as primary and views government as justified only insofar as it protects a framework within which individuals can pursue their own ends. Like Paine, he is suspicious of concentrated political power and emphasizes the importance of voluntary association and individual autonomy. From Smith, he inherits the idea that self-interested individuals, operating within a system of exchange and competition, can produce social coordination and prosperity without central direction. Friedman does not dwell on natural rights language, but his framework implicitly reflects it. The defense of markets is also a defense of the individual's right to choose, act, and bear responsibility for outcomes. What he adds is a modern synthesis from showing not only that freedom is morally compelling, but that it is institutionally workable and empirically superior in complex societies. In that sense, Friedman can be seen as carrying forward the classical liberal tradition into the 20th century, translating its philosophical commitment to individual liberty into a practical blueprint for economic organization in the modern world.